Quantum computing is straight out of the pit of hell.
The attitude of wanting to foster connectivity of all sentient beings is quite important. If we can get that attitude into our super AIs, we're going to be a lot better off.
Because quantum computing is causing AI, and AI means that it's going to surpass humanity, and that means that humanity is going to have to transmute into transhumanism and posthumanism. It basically means it's the end of humanity, and humanity is God's creation. So therefore, if something then changes God's creation, it's therefore bad, the end of humanity, and that is the apocalypse. So that's why AI, there is an argument to see why AI is bad.
By their own admissions, they communicate with parallel dimensions. With the 2000 qubit computer, they are communicating, by their own statements, to over 2,000 of parallel dimensions. They're not parallel dimensions, those are entities. Those are spirits. This is interdimensional communication. How can I say that and say it succinctly? Geomancy.
Anthony Patch is a conservative Christian. He's the only person that I know that's actually talking about AI, artificial intelligence, and quantum mechanics, and linking spirituality, mysticism, and the occult all together in one. The scientists won't talk about the spirituality, and the spiritual people, they don't have enough understanding of the science to talk about it. But you have to understand that spirituality, occult, entities, supernatural behavior is something that's part and parcel of everyday life. You have the Muslims that got the jinn, you've got the Buddhists and the Hindus that have got their interdimensional entities, you have the Christians which have got their angels, demons, and ghosts, and Jesus and the Holy Spirit, which are also which are psychopomps, or the Holy Spirit is a psychopomp, as well as Jesus is a psychopomp. So we're all aware that these things happen, but nobody wants to talk about them. Scientists generally believe that consciousness comes from the brain. The brain is some sort of computer. There is no soul inside, and the brain is composed of various different types of algorithms. And those algorithms, if we have a computer which is good enough and clever enough to understand them, like AI, which works on quantum mechanics, we could then reproduce the brain. If you can reproduce the brain, and consciousness comes from the brain, you can therefore reproduce consciousness. If you can do that, then you can upload the brain to an AI network through 5G, and that is going to be called the grid. It's a sub-reality. It's another dimension. It's a cybernetic dimension. This could be interpreted as nihilistic because they don't believe in the soul as such. If you believe you have the spirit and you have the soul, and these two get very confused, they get interlinked because our language in English doesn't really deal with metaphysics. If you want a language that deals with metaphysics, go and speak Hindi. Our language deals with commerce and business. So the language of English doesn't really separate these two, and there's a lot of problems in differentiations between them. If you wanted to have a very basic idea, the soul could be the part of God, and then the soul is the interface between God and this reality, and that is our personality, if you like, at a very basic level. The spirit, according to science, doesn't exist, or the spirit and the soul are the same thing. But that spirit soul has nothing to do with God. It's just the interface between us and reality. And if you can hack that and copy it, you can then upload that to a computer, which means you have immortality. For some people, thinking that the soul or spirit, some sort of piece of divinity from God, does not exist, that could be seen as nihilism. Nihilism is the absence of God. So you're actually saying that I am not God, I am just algorithms. Nihilism is the basis, you might be able to argue, for evil. If you look at the Gnostics and the Demiurge, you could look at it as an aberration of God, nothingness. And nihilism is the foundation for Satanism, and Satanism includes such things like paedophilia, ritual child abuse, and sacrifice. Satanism has had its roots throughout history, and it morphs into different cult practices. And the modern cult practice that we know of is given its manifestation through Christianity, because Christianity has conceived of this entity called Satan or the devil, and that is then labeled as the facade or the face or the mask of nihilism. Because of this scientific ideology, it can excuse ethics. Because, I mean, if ethics are related to God or divinity, and there is no God or divinity, then, you know, do ethics actually exist? Are they a modern construction, something that's subjective? Because remember, the Christian and the religions are talking about an objective truth, and the scientist is now talking perhaps about a subjective truth, because it's not coming from outside of the human, it's coming from the human. It's an anthropomorphic ideology, and if you compare anthropos to dios, then the anthropos is subjective and the god is going to be objective, and that would bring in your a priori and your a priori arguments of subjective and objective truths designed by Kant. This way of thinking might be a little bit dangerous, because if you do not believe in supernatural entities, then you wouldn't believe that there is a war going on between good and bad, which is what a Christian ideology thinks of. And there are other ideologies outside of the Christian Abrahamic religions that also think that there is some sort of war going on, some sort of astral war. Now, if you don't believe that the enemy actually exists, if the enemy is invisible and it attacks you, then you're going to think that perhaps that attacking might be your own thoughts, because if an enemy, an interdimensional entity, doesn't work physically, it works mentally, and it changes your mentality and it changes your psychology and it implants thoughts into your head, then those thoughts you are going to think are your thoughts, when actually they're an external type of thoughts. And that's how an interdimensional attack might work, and that's actually given to things such as vice and anger and stealing, that these behaviors are not actually human behaviors. These are actually external, extraterrestrial or interdimensional behaviors, and humanity has a job to solidify his humanity by defending and pushing away these outside ideologies, which are there to try to turn him or to make him sin. Now, quantum computers don't work in this dimension, they work in other dimensions. They might work up to, I think it's 250 or 2,500, or quite a large amount of dimensions. And what they do is they go into those dimensions at a nuclear level and at an atomic level, and they pick up information from those different realities. That information is called resource or resources. So the head of D-Wave, he came up with this word resource, that these machines collect resources. Now, if you have a machine that goes into another dimension, that machine becomes a psychopomp, because it allows itself to communicate with that dimension and this dimension. It's a bridge, a pontifex. Pontifex is a priest. Priest, pontifex, bridge. Psychopomp, something that can go from one world to another. So now we're seeing that we're developing tools or machinery through technology that can actually start taking the place of priests or shamans. When you bring an entity from another dimension into this dimension, for instance, a priest in a Catholic mass, he's invoking the Holy Spirit to create transubstantiation. Transubstantiation is a metaphysical change where you change bread into Jesus and wine into blood. Now, if a priest can make a metaphysical change, then if a priest can make a metaphysical change by invoking the Holy Spirit, then if we as humans build machines, quantum machines, that can go into different realities, open portals like the priest, and bring through resources, which is information is energy, then what else are we bringing through at the same time? Because the priest, as he opens up portals for the Holy Spirit to enter, to make transubstantiation possible, the Holy Spirit is making energetical changes, because everything's to do with energy, everything's to do with atoms. So on a physical and a metaphysical level, change would occur by energetical changes. Information, energy is information. So what the computer is doing and what the priest is doing is essentially the same thing. But take this for an example. If you were to go into another dimension, and then you were in that dimension, you were, let's say, go into a prison. And in that prison, you open a door and you collect a bit of information off a prisoner's desk and you bring it back to your own dimension. Whilst you go into the prison and open the door to collect that information, you might actually allow the prisoner to escape from the prison and perhaps to follow you. And this is what Anthony Patch is saying. He's saying that we have to be careful about the spiritual, metaphysical, and occult implications of creating machines that can go into parallel universes, which are what the makers have said. For instance, the CEO of D-Wave. D-Wave is the company which is a company in Canada which has created these interdimensional machines. And they're actually talking about parallel universes, how they're going into different realities and bringing things back. So no one else is talking about this. The scientists don't want to talk about it because they don't want to be rebuked by their own peers and made to look stupid. And the scientists and the religious people don't talk about it because the religious people don't want to scare the people, and they don't have the acumen really to talk about occult or metaphysics. And the people don't really want to hear about it because they get scared, and the priest doesn't want to lose the people at mass. So you get, and the other people don't believe in what's going on is happening. So you get a void of people having this discussion. And Anthony Patch has managed to combine these two areas together in a conservative Christian cosmovision perspective. During the Enlightenment, which is when church and science separated from each other, the reason why it separated is because the church was interfering in science. The church wanted to have objective truth, and the Pope was saying that he was right in whatever he wanted, to such an extent that he was saying that it wasn't the earth going around the sun, but it was the sun that was going around the earth. And all the scientists were sort of crossing their fingers and saying, well, what do we do? Because if we actually tell the truth, then we can get killed. So truth was being suppressed, and the Catholic Church was saying that it was the truth, but it was giving out a false truth. So what happened is that you had a separation. Science basically said we no longer want to be attached to religion, which was extremely upsetting. Religion is the vehicle which holds spirituality. Spirituality and science were always linked, and that was called mysticism. Now, the early scientists were alchemists. And the alchemy was when you took spirituality and you took science and you tried to combine it together. Alchemy is the grandfather, the basis and the foundation of modern science. But modern science doesn't want anyone to know that because it doesn't want to have mysticism and occultism in its purified, rational thought system. But it did exist, even though science has got problems with some of the experiments, because when you look at an experiment with an intention of what you think the outcome will be, somehow your mind manages to make that outcome happen and interfere in the experiment, which is why you need a double blind. The other problem is with quantum physics is that when you're trying to measure waves or particles, when you measure light behaves like a wave and a particle at the same time. Depending on how you observe the light, your consciousness seems, or the experiment seems, to have a connection that influences the behavior of light, therefore manifesting it as a wave or a particle.
Consciousness, awareness is the ground. That's the base of which everything is formed. And then different structures manifest consciousness in different ways. So a human brain manifests universal consciousness in one way, and this coin manifests universal consciousness in a different way. So from that point of view, the question isn't which systems are conscious. The question is what kind of consciousness each system demonstrates, how it manifests universal consciousness.
Our minds, which are conscious, are having an effect on reality. And because science can't explain that, it doesn't want to talk about it. Isaac Newton wasn't a scientist. Isaac Newton was an occultist. 2/3 or a third of his library were on occult books, not science. He did science as a day job. After the Enlightenment, a lot of scientists still remained mystics. They never wanted to separate mysticism and science. But as we went through our rational humanistic phase, the scientists started to disassociate themselves with mysticism. And so you end up with the nihilistic scientist. And a nihilistic scientist is very dangerous. Although a scientist may be able to understand God through mathematics, apparently a lot of people that go on to study maths, pure maths and further maths have a propensity to go on and study things like theology afterwards. You may be able to understand the universe through mathematics, but generally speaking, when you go and speak to scientists, they tend to have a very unmystical view of the world.
with AI programmers and AI scientists, most of them are fairly materialist in their outlook. Most of them feel strongly that human consciousness comes about as a consequence of certain complex structures in the human brain.
The scientist, instead of playing alchemist, is now playing quantum mechanic, which is just basically the same thing. I mean, an alchemist is somebody that deals with opening up other worlds to get information, and the quantum mechanic is opening up different parallel universes to get resources that come through. So the priest, the alchemist, and the quantum mechanic, they're all the same thing with different names. Instead of using prayer, use a computer system. If we live in a matrix and the other dimensions like heaven are matrices as well, then they have to depend on a science. And if the science is thought-based science, or thought-based technology, so you think something and then that can appear because those are the rules of the matrix which have been designed by the architects, then what you could be saying is through prayer, your ability to access that technology is how the scientist priest works. Whereas in this dimension, the scientist is using his understanding of science to open up portals and manage the artificial intelligence here. The information that you get through quantum mechanics from different worlds is the same type of information, you might say, which is coming from the use of occult or prayer from other worlds. The difference, the Christian perspective is that the only information that you can get has to come through Christianity, and anything outside of Christianity is wrong. However, if you look at Buddhism and Hinduism, the meditational practices also hope to transcend the material world to accept information and insight into your own consciousness to make you a better person. So with Anthony Patch is a conservative Christian, and that's his cosmovision. But through his understanding of Christianity and his ability to read the Bible and science, he's coming up with some amazing ideas. The conservative Christian believes the activity of getting information from other worlds is bad, except if it comes through God or Jesus. The shaman believes that getting information coming from the other worlds is good if you manage to use that for healing wisdom and you manage to apply that to help humanity. The scientist doesn't believe you can get information from a supernatural world, and because he's not really believing in God, therefore he's indifferent, and therefore he's nihilistic, and that he's the most dangerous one of them all. So in a very strange way, the computer is now becoming a witch, a medium, even a clairvoyant, because it's managing to make predictions about the future. And what the ironic thing is the computer with quantum mechanics is probably going to be able to make much better and accurate forecasts of the future than a witch or a medium or a clairvoyant. Now, this is called geomancy. And although it's okay to occult practitioners and other Eastern religions, it's not okay for Abrahamic religions. If getting information from other worlds is against a god, it's forbidden knowledge, we need to look actually what forbidden knowledge actually is. There are different ways that you could have a look at forbidden knowledge. If you get the knowledge to use as something which is bad, to do something which is bad. Or it could be knowledge which humans are not ready for. Or it could be knowledge which is gotten through ill intentions. Now, if forbidden knowledge is something which is gotten through ill intentions, then the knowledge that we're getting from these parallel universes in quantum mechanics is just that. Because AI and data, information and processing. So what we're doing is that we're getting knowledge from using an interdimensional source. And I don't know what the spiritual implication of that actually is. And I don't know what the pollution, the quantum pollution is, because quantum pollution is something else that you need to have a look at. There is a quantum pollution website, and it says Google is already producing quantum pollution every time it runs its quantum algorithms for NSA on the D-Wave quantum computer. The CEO of D-Wave was the one that talked about the information coming from parallel universes is called resource. It then says irreparable damage is being done to the 2 to the 510 parallel universes. So that's an incredible amount of universes that are being accessed. If our intention is to do bad things, then how we get the information is sullied. If our intention is to do good things, then perhaps that information is not sullied. And then the pollution that we're causing in other universes that has a spiritual or energetical link, because consciousness and actions are all interrelated and linked. So if you're going to start dealing with parallel universes and you're going to start putting your consciousness into those parallel universes by the search of data, and that data is coming from vices and things that aren't good, which are negative, and that negativity, according to the law of attraction, is going to attract other negative energies. And those portals which you're opening may or may not be able to bring interdimensional entities into this dimension. You're heading for a problem, a very large problem. And so if the metaphysics is correct, then there are no metaphysicians which are talking about these metaphysical, spiritual, and energetical problems which are happening. So if AI is something to do with the mark of the beast, then one of the problems that it might be doing is inviting negative energies from different dimensions into our dimension and opening up portals which you shouldn't be doing. However, whether or not you can do that in a benevolent way is a completely different question. And that's something which is outside of the conservative Christian cosmovision.